all over the United States. In municipalities, people are gathering together in committees and groups and appointed organizations to try to deal with the problem of the police. And there are proposals that the police be reformed in all kinds of ways, new systems of discipline, even that the police departments be abolished. There's another way, however, of approaching this question, and it is to say that a problem that we really face is police departments whose function isn't appropriate to the purposes they're trying to achieve. That if we started out and thought about what we want in terms of police as a part of security, we might come out with something different than the average police department. So we're calling that transformation, and we have with us today a great expert, a lot of experience, Chief Mike Butler, who is recently retired after 26 years in the police department in Longmont, Colorado. Welcome, Mike. Glad to have you with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, John. Great to be here.
And why don't you give us a little background, a little personal background and professional background before you got to Longmont?
Okay, well, before and during, I'm the father of 5 daughters, 6 grandchildren, and needless to say, that kind of kept me busy for a large part of my day and life. And people would ask me, what do you do in your spare time? And I would say I get in and out of the car. That was kind of what I did. And, you know, I have some hobbies. I am a photographer. I focus on astrophotography. I've dabbled in some astronomy as well. I am just fascinated by the night sky and what the universe has to offer us, I guess. And then I do a little writing, and I love to travel. Although right now that's been minimized a little bit by our pandemic. So I've as you said, I was the police chief and public safety chief in Longmont. I was the police chief for 15 years, and then I took on the role of public safety chief, where I oversaw police, fire, and I'll potentially talk about a new division that we developed called a division of community health and resiliency, which was actually part of our movement towards transforming ourselves. I retired in July of last year, 2020, and enjoying some decompression time.
Now, take us back to when you first got to Longmont, and let us go on a journey with you. What did you find? What did you do? What worked, what didn't? That's a general set of questions that we're interested in learning from you.
Great. Well, Longmont wasn't different than just about all the other police departments in the country. What I found was kind of an armed fortress in terms of the building itself. Longmont, again, not unlike a lot of other police departments, seemed to be like a faceless entity within our community. People didn't know who the police department was unless they read about something in the media or the news. The department itself, I'm just going to say, was, in my mind, was kind of primitive in terms of how it approached policing and how it approached its sense of service with a community. And so, but there were also good people there. There were people, that's how it was guided, that's how it was structured. That was somewhat of the culture. And it wasn't the police profession all over the country was kind of like that. And I at some level, the police profession is still very much like that. They've dabbled, the police have dabbled in certain ideas called community policing, but those have been kind of benign in their approach and then how they played out. But anyway, that's what was there. I was a resident of Longmont while I worked in another department, a neighboring department in a neighboring community. I lived in Longmont, so I was very familiar with the community itself and somewhat familiar with its police department. I became the police chief in 1993, but a few years prior to that, Longmont had a set of circumstances not unlike what we're reading about and hearing about in the country today. A white police officer shot 2 Hispanic boys that ended up causing a significant furor in our community. And Longmont's around 30 to 35% Latino. It's a very diverse community. We're about 100,000 people. It's a very diverse community, and the Latino community, the way this community was designed, it's like you're on either the wrong side of the tracks or the right side of the tracks. And the Latino population was kind of congregated on the east side of the community, and others who were not Latino were elsewhere. And so it's not just what we encountered as a police department, it's what we also encountered as a community in terms of what the makeup and culture was like in our community. And so there was still a lot of healing going on. And in terms of what happened with that officer-involved shooting of 2 Hispanic boys. And one of the initial meetings I had were with key Latino leaders in terms of what we were going to do to try to minimize the gap or the lack of relationship that police had with the Latino community. And so, but it wasn't just the Latino community, it was just about every aspect of the community. It was how we were with youth, how we were with the business community, how we were with neighborhoods, how we were with our minority Latino community. There was little to no connection with our community. So we began a journey of creating a different kind of police department, and we began a journey that had to shift a lot of things in terms of, who we are, what we did and how we did it within our community. There was, over time, a complete resetting and recalibration of our identity and our systems and processes, our internal systems and processes, from a department that seemed to be very isolated in the community itself. So a lot of things happened. And one of the main tools that I used in terms of shifting who we were was conversations. I spent a lot of time personally in conversations with lots of people. And we began as quickly as we could to bring people from the community to within the department to help us become the kind of organization and kind of department that we needed to become. And so we minimize this. What we're seeing now and across America is this thin blue line approach. Policing are often referred to as a thin blue line that separates good from evil. And police officers kind of see themselves as kind of the warriors that are going to battle evil in a community. And so one of the main shifts we made was rethinking the role of police officer from being a warrior to being a relationship builder, to being an ambassador, to being a guardian, to being people who could reach out into the community and kind of leverage the social capital that our community had. And so there were a number of things that we did over time to get us to that point. We had to shift a lot of things internally. We changed the profile of the person that we wanted to hire as a police officer. We changed a number of processes and systems in terms of trying to support this partnership that we wanted with our community. Our motto became policing in partnership with the people. We reorganized how police officers were working in the community. We actually identified specific neighborhoods in our community, broke those down into specific kinds of neighborhoods, and assigned police officers to those neighborhoods for long periods of time. You know, often police officers initially, they would come in to work and they didn't know where they were going to work that day or that shift. So that was one of the smaller things we did, but it was an important thing that we did in terms of saying, you know, no, we're not gonna do that anymore. We're gonna work in our community, and we're gonna develop relationships with each individual neighborhood. And we're gonna work with other organizations and institutions and entities, partnering with them to help bring a better relationship between those entities and those neighborhoods. In fact, the police department became kind of the point on all of that. You know, we're the only entity or institution that works 24/7. All the others were kind of in a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 mode. And so we were kind of charged ourselves with bringing in other resources or other ways of other organizations into neighborhoods. So we really wanted to develop partnerships with specific neighborhoods so that the officers themselves got very personal and build relationships with people who lived in those neighborhoods, the schools that were in those neighborhoods, the churches that were in those neighborhoods. And we looked at it from the perspective of our effectiveness was not measured by just, okay, was there crime or wasn't there crime, even though that was a measurement or disorder. But we looked at it from the perspective of, to what level could we help a neighborhood become self-sustaining? And so let's say, for instance, that there was a residence or a neighborhood or an apartment complex or a business or a school that required a lot of police presence. We kept on getting calls for service. Our effectiveness was measured by, to what level aren't we needed anymore? And to what level could this neighborhood or this residence or a business or school begin to take on the issue that they had and problem solve and come up with their own solutions. And then we could sit by on the sidelines if we were needed, but we would be there to help if that was the case. And so I can't tell you, John, how many times I got a specific apartment complex in mind, but how many times we did that. I mean, I'm talking thousands of times over a period of 25 years where, for instance, in one apartment complex that was federally subsidized housing, there was quite a bit of gang activity, quite a bit of drug activity, and people did not feel safe in that apartment complex, or like 150 units in that complex. And I'll just make a long story real short here, but we ended up working with management of that apartment complex. We ended up working with the residents of that apartment complex. And at one point we were getting 100 to 150 calls a month to that particular complex. The long story real short is we narrowed that down to fewer than, on the average, of 5. And that apartment complex became much safer, and people felt safer, and people felt more integrated amongst themselves as they kind of built their own relationships and galvanized as a group of tenants that lived there. And there were long-term residents that were there because it was subsidized housing. But it was not your typical neighborhood with lots of homes and ownership of homes. It was an apartment complex. And so we helped with getting rid of the minimizing the gang activity, the drug activity. And then we helped the neighborhood itself kind of understand what its role and responsibility was in terms of creating a safe neighborhood and creating a place that could sustain that sense of safety. And this was years ago, and today that neighborhood is still, that apartment complex is still very much that way in terms of minimal police response as it begins to kind of become more interdependent within itself. And so we did that, like I said, thousands of times throughout our community over the years. Again, with the idea that, a healthy, strong neighborhood had more resilience against crime and disorder than a bunch of armed guards always coming in to the neighborhood. And so that was the essence of what we did within our community. And so initially we began going down that path, but we also had to shift a lot of our culture within the organization. And there were a lot of things that had to happen in order for that kind of service to occur. And so we did a lot of things over the years. I'll give you an example of, we created walking teams of police officers, not because, they would walk neighborhoods. Myself and another person walked neighborhoods on an ongoing basis. And we encouraged people to feel and believe they belonged to our community. And you well know that if people have that sense of belonging, they're more likely to take care of their neighborhood and their community. And so we did a tremendous amount of that. And we actually also invited people in these walks, when we would meet people, to become more engaged in the community. Longmont, not like any other community, with people struggling with mental health, people struggling with addiction, people struggling with homelessness, or people with other issues or other social or health issues. And what we knew was that we, as a public safety department, and all the other institutions and organizations that kind of helped serve folks who are struggling with mental health or addiction or homelessness, perhaps we could put them in a bowl about this big, but the problem was as big as our room. And so how do we fill that gap, so to speak? And the way of filling that gap, at least our own philosophy is that we really had to somehow surface, activate, and coordinate the goodness, the gifts, the talents, the resources, the expertise, the social capital in our community. So we began going down that road of leveraging that social capital. And we got so many people who were willing to say yes. They kind of like, put me in, coach. What do you want me to do? I'll be happy to help. We began to realize, not surprisingly, that people have gifts, they have talents, they have resources, and they want to offer those gifts. They want to offer those resources and expertise in any way they can. They just don't know how. And so for us, the role of government, the role of public safety began to go down this path of coordinating that role of what can we do to attach the expertise and resources in our community to those folks who needed those resources and expertise. And it was all designed based on relationships, and that if we could surround people who were struggling with addiction or mental health issues or homelessness with folks who were healthier in their life, and we could create circles of accountability and support for those folks who needed it, that we could begin to fill that gap, and that we could make large efforts in terms of connecting people to people who wanted to offer their own talents, their own skills, gifts. And so that became a big role for us within our public safety, within our police department. But again, that transformation didn't occur overnight. And there were a lot of things that happened along the way that were painful. And because we had our identity change caused people who got into policing to put the bad guy in jail, so to speak. That wasn't our role. It wasn't our role exclusively. We had to figure out how to use our enforcement role more judiciously and more appropriately than just activating the criminal justice system. And so instead of serving our community through the utilization of our criminal justice system, we began to serve our community through the development of relationships between us and our community, and then the kind of the coordination of people in the community to other people in the community, which in my mind can be it's a new frontier for government in terms of how it sees itself and how it sees its role. And I'll be frank with you, if you can do that in a police department, you can do that in any role, any institution. Mm-hmm. And so we changed our role from law enforcers. And by the way, you used policing, but most people say law enforcement as if that's all we do. Mm-hmm. And so people get into the sense that you enforce the laws. Well, that is a role, but how could we do that more judiciously? And how can we do it more appropriately? From just mere enforcers to how do we become relationship builders? How do we become guardians? How do we become ambassadors? How do we become the coordinators of social capital in terms of what we do? And so over time, those things began to occur more and more and more. And I will say that for our community of about 100, at one point when we had 65,000 people, we had close to 4,500 Part 1 crimes. Part 1 crimes are the very serious crimes that we look at. When we ended up with 100,000 people, we then had close to 2,700 Part 1 crimes. Mm-hmm. And so even though the population boomed, and it did boom in this community, it became a destination place for lots of folks. The serious crime went way down. And we attribute it to part of what we did, but we also very much attribute it to our community stepping up and saying, we have responsibility for public safety as well. Because at one point, going back to your question, what was it like when we got here? There was this unhealthy dependency on police. And everybody wanted to dial 911 or call the cops for anything. And rather than calling a neighbor or utilizing the resources that a neighborhood had, they'd call the cops. And so we had to at some level, wean our community off of that sense of, here's your go-to for your solution. And so we began that process as well. Not an easy thing to do when people are saying, that's what I pay my taxes for. And I'm here to, you're here to help me. And so we began slowly but surely to kind of identify different calls for service that we would work with the community on and saying, this is what we want and need you to do so that we can maybe handle some more serious things that we can do. And so those were not easy conversations with neighborhoods in our community.
Can I ask Mike, at that point, did you have any neighborhood organizations that you could work with that sort of were representative, or were you mostly dealing with building relationships with individuals?
Great question. No, we had very little neighborhood organizational structure going on. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we developed our beat alignments and assignments on neighborhoods began that evolution of seeing a neighborhood differently within city government and within the rest of the community. And so we actually would identify neighborhoods by the name of their neighborhood. And so people began to take on the identity. Well, we're from the Stonehenge neighborhood. We're Stonehengers, so to speak. And people in government began to see, okay, well, maybe we can align Stonehenge with what we're doing as well in terms of other kinds of services. I have to say, though, that other parts of city government didn't necessarily line itself with the measurement of effectiveness that we had in terms of our effectiveness is measured by how little the community needs us. And so other entities, nonprofits, other parts of city government kind of stayed in that realm of well, the more they need us, the better. And that kind of helps us kind of grow us as well. And that was a tough nut. It still is a tough nut to crack across our country in terms of, that's how these institutions come into being. They become because of the needs of others, and then they kind of continue on down that path. Well, we within public safety, within police, took the opposite approach in terms of saying, okay, at one point we were getting called 150 times a month. Now we're only getting called 5 times a month. That was something to high five ourselves with. That was something we could say, that's good. That's good, because that's what a healthy neighborhood, that's what a healthy community is about. It doesn't need the police because they're resolving issues on their own. But I will say, everything that had to occur internally within police had to shift, and everything, our relationship between us and our community had to shift, and the culture of a community saying, well, we're dependent on police, to know now where we can be interdependent on each other. Those were all shifts that had to occur. And so as you look at transforming police across the country, there's still a tremendous amount of work to do. The police profession kind of sees things and says, okay, well, we'll fix our disciplinary system. We'll start hammering cops more for what they're doing, or we'll pass laws at the state level to try to hold people accountable throughout the state, hold police officers accountable. Those things have little to no impact in the long run. The shift in culture has to occur with the nature of who you are and what you do and how you do it, and role definition or role redefinition around that. And the shift in the culture has to occur with the kind of people you hire. Are you going to hire people who go out and and kind of make arrests and be the enforcer in the community? Or can you hire people who thrive on relationships and thrive on building those relationships and have this sense of service versus a sense of adventure, so to speak? And who do you promote? And how do you develop performance management systems, and how you evaluate? And the architecture of the organization has to shift. I mean, we went from a top-down command and control to everybody has a piece of the action. Everybody's responsible for the quality of service and how this organization, how our department works. And that was a huge shift within our organization in terms of how that played out, because police are kind of seen as paramilitary, and they have this rank structure, and you report to somebody and they tell you what to do, when to do it, where to do it, how to do it, and you don't ask why. Well, we had to shift that to people who said, you know what, I have the capacity to figure these things out, and I don't need management or leadership to tell me what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. That in and of itself, our partnership between management, leadership, and our staff had to become real, had to become substantive. And we looked at that relationship that we had with our staff, with people who were police officers and myself, as a model for how police officers could be in the community, how that could play out. You just can't say, well, we're going to command and control ourselves into working in partnership with the community. If that command and control model is the one they're used to, they won't really understand or know what partnership looks like between police and the community, if that makes sense. So all those shifts had to occur, and they had to occur over time. And we began using different alternatives as well in terms of restorative justice. Instead of arresting people, we would refer people. We started this restorative justice program. Over the years, John, we've referred over 7,000 people. And the other part of that is kind of getting the community to kind of redefine justice itself, from this eye for an eye and this kind of pound of flesh to justice could look a lot different. And so out of 100,000 people in this community, we think we've kind of exposed restorative justice principles to close to 20,000 people, which is a good start, but we're still working on that. Instead of arresting people who committed crimes because of their mental health issue or because of their addiction, we created new ways of doing business where we could actually build relationships with other people in the community, build relationships between police and those folks. I have story after story, John, of people that before we did that, we responded to individuals 1,000 times, seriously. And hundreds of times in the emergency department, who now we don't see anymore, who now have jobs, who now have treatment, who have a social network. And it had a lot to do with how the police responded. And so you take any police department, if a police department, anywhere in the country, they will tell you that their big issues have a lot to do with people struggling with addiction, people struggling with their mental health. And that shift in what we did to respond to that played out in ways that we're still discovering the benefits in terms of how we responded to people. So it wasn't just structures, systems, culture. It was our programmatic approach, our service delivery approach that we had to shift considerably. And that was a big deal because, okay, someone's in possession of methamphetamine. That's a felony arrest. They just committed a felony. To get a police officer to think, well, that's a felony arrest, to saying, okay, what can I do to get this person so that they can work on their addiction? If I arrest that person, their capacity to get a job, their capacity to get housing goes way down because they have that kind of record. But if I can help that person find services or connections in the community or healthy relationships with people in the community and build my own relationship with that person, an entirely different approach to how police departments police. So I could go on and on and on, but I'll stop there and let you ask questions or anything else.
Well, one of the things that strikes me about this story is that a lot of police departments currently working with representatives from various communities are beginning to say there are these people who have these specialized problems, drugs, homelessness, etc. And what we're going to do is develop a more cooperative network with the agencies that handle those kinds of people and their problems so that we can be better at enforcing the law. And if I hear what you just told us, I think it's a major shift from what's going on, which is reordering the institutional decks on the chair, the chairs on the deck. What you're doing is saying it is people living in the community that we found are willing to contribute. And the question is, how do we establish relationships between what are called problems and the people in the neighborhood who have all kinds of talents and gifts that they might bring to bear in relationship to a person, that you're seeing community first rather than interagency. That sounds to me like a real invention.
It is a shift. It's a significant shift in so many different ways. But it's not just the police department that needs to transform. It's also neighborhoods and communities have to do that, have to go through a transformation process as well in terms of what they call the police for, or how, to what level do they interact with each other and try to solve each other's issues versus calling the police or calling another entity within government or whatever that might look like. Because the real answers and the real health of any neighborhood is found, or community is found there. Now, not to say that we disappeared and we're not responding, we do, but the numbers have gone way down, and the kinds of things we go on have changed. And so people have become more interdependent, and it's not everywhere in our community. There are certain neighborhoods in our community that are still struggling with some of that. But that's the trend, and that's the movement, and that's not going to stop in terms of that way forward. That's where we're going to kind of continue. And I'm no longer there. I no longer work with the police, but I'll use this phrase that may or may not be the right phrase, but we institutionalized these ways of doing business enough so that if someone came in and said, I want to do it different, I want to go back to the old way, it would be impossible. So because that's what the community is now used to. And so this working in partnership, joint accountability, each has the responsibility to be part of problem identification and solutions, has really become the way we do business.
Well, that's a great summary, because achieving that kind of community culture, community responsibility, police redefinition of their role, that's not easy. And you've had a fair amount of time to achieve that, but you've led the way, and we really appreciate your sharing the story with us. Let me ask you, if people had some interest in getting more detail about what's going on in Longmont, how would they do that? How could they?
I'm open to that. I'm doing quite a bit of that right now. I'm open to people connecting with me, and I've worked with other police departments from around the country, other communities, and happy to be part of helping others.
Well, let's do this right now for the people who are listening and will be listening over the years, I think, to this discussion. Let's give them your email. So if you're willing to be available for direct contact, what is your email?
Well, so my email is Urantia. That's URANTIA, Urantia101 @gmail.com.
Well, this has been a very, very informative discussion that we've had here, and we appreciate your taking your time today to join us. And I'm sure you're going to be hearing from people who want to rethink not police reform or not police abolishment, but the transformation of functions and relationships and the mutual obligation between police and communities. So thanks for your leadership. You've been a great contributor, I think, to the possibilities of the future.
Thank you. You're welcome.